Thank you for joining us and welcome to our first webinar for 2020. My name is Rosemarie Dentesano. I work with the Corporate Edge team as a culture and leadership partner, and I bring to the table more than 20 years experience working in the culture space. And I guess I have worked with many diverse organisations in helping them think through their culture imperatives and how they design, have a lead and have a manage and implement their cultures in many different fields, industry sectors, geographies, and also have led and managed teams globally. So I've got, I guess, I've actually had to also manage my own culture and manage the company culture of businesses that I've worked in. Corporate Edge, many of you online are Corporate Edge clients, so fantastic to have you join us, and some folks who are joining might be new to Corporate Edge, so hopefully you'll get to experience the Corporate Edge way as we present this webinar today. Corporate Edge are into their 21st year of business, founded by Phil Allison as an organisation that really prides itself on being culture and leadership experts and working to create great places for people to work. So today's webinar is all about how to transform your culture in 2020. The next slide actually gives you a bit about me, and I've just got to make sure I'm pressing the right buttons here. Okay, so the way that this webinar is going to work is that I do have a PowerPoint. I'm sorry that I'm not kind of scribing in real time or engaging you in group chat. But for today, what we'll do is I've got a webinar presentation, which is some PowerPoints. We'll talk through those. Also have some polling questions that I will introduce at different times, and really look forward to your participating in those polls so that we can get a sense of what people are doing in the culture space and where there's opportunity to share some of your experiences. So I'm also really conscious that whilst I'm presenting this webinar, we've got people online who work in this space and have an incredible amount of great information to share. So let's use it as an opportunity to share and exchange as we go. So we've got some, so obviously a PowerPoint flow, some polls. The other piece that I need to let you know is that we are recording the webinar. So the recording will be sent to you as a follow-up once we finish, and probably get rid of some of the stuff at the beginning where I wasn't making any sense. And we also want to wrap up with the opportunity for you to conduct a culture audit. So I'll introduce that concept to you as we get through the presentation today. So we are scheduled to run till 3 o'clock. Let's see how we go for time. We obviously, hopefully there's opportunity for some good discussion, some good dialogue as we go through the webinar today. Okay, so a bit about me, a bit about Corporate Edge. This slide shows a couple of the key clients that we've worked with and continue to work with, supporting them in their culture journey. So when we look at the objectives today and what we've committed to share with you, we really wanted to look at kind of jumping into culture and actually recognising that culture is a reflection of your leadership, and the culture that you have can reflect either positively or negatively on your leadership. And the reason why we've chosen this topic today is because we really want organisations and leaders to think about what is it they want to be known for, and will you lead your culture as you move forward, or will you kind of let it happen by chance? Because if you have ever heard of Edgar Schein, he's a former professor at MIT Sloan, and he was one of the early founders of org development, organisational culture, and he actually has this quote, which is, if you do not manage culture, it manages you, and you may not even be aware of the extent this is happening. So it's something that can kind of creep up on you and not realise where you're at. And we've got some great examples to talk about today where that's occurred. So one of the starting points is to understand the difference between culture and engagement, because we often use the terms interchangeably and they are actually different. They're both really important, but they are different. I want to share with you the Corporate Edge model, which is the Corporate Edge step-by-step process for defining, articulating and embedding a healthy workplace culture. walk through what we see as being the three fundamentals of your leadership in culture, and then lastly share with you an opportunity to audit your approach against our Acing Culture Roadmap. And the Acing Culture Roadmap is what we're going to go through in the second part of this. So they're the objectives for today, and that's kind of the roadmap that we're going to follow. So the first thing is that we actually want to start by, identifying the distinction between culture versus climate versus engagement. And this is where I'm really keen to get some of your insight to start with. And that is, if you can share with me, how do you differentiate between culture, climate and engagement? So if someone came to you and said, what's the difference? What would you say? So have a go in the chat channel, and if you can tell me what you understand and how you define the difference between those three elements. So over to you for a little while. No one's prepared to jump in. Why don't we start with culture? How do you define culture? Anyone want to give me a definition for culture? There are lots of different ways to define it. So Sandy says that culture is the soul of the organisation, the way we do things. It's the overarching atmosphere from flow, the way we do things around here. The way we do things around here is a very popular term for culture, and it's that doing. It's a real doing piece. And engagement, perspiration versus inspiration. Irene, that's fabulous. I like that. And that's important to think about as we unravel the variance. So Sumed says work ethics. So let's keep moving and share with you the way that we distinguish between the three elements, because all three elements, as I mentioned, are important. It's a bit like this. Do you remember in the park there's like the seesaw, and you had to kind of keep the seesaw in balance to be able to not fall off? So if you think about how we actually keep the balance between the culture, our climate, our engagement. So culture is very much the underpinning values, beliefs and guiding principles that govern patterns of behaviour. So they are the behaviours that we see, they are the rituals that we see, they are the symbols that are evident, and they typically iterate or demonstrate what is important and how we do things around here. So it's kind of what's valued, how we do things. Climate is really the mood or the temperature of the organisation, and it can fluctuate depending on, what's going on. So I guess the question, here is it ever okay for a leader to turn up in a bad mood? So there is research that shows that a leader's mood can actually impact productivity and performance by plus or minus 20% on a daily basis. So how you show up, so that kind of that temperature, that climate is critically important. And then finally, engagement is around how people feel about the organisation. And engagement's really about pride, advocacy, intention to stay, and how I actually feel about my work. So the three together, and what they say is that, so Gallup research will tell you that culture is a prime driver of engagement, and that you actually, by having the right culture, improve your engagement, and it can actually improve workplace productivity, workplace wellness. They talk about 4 times greater earning per share and 21% greater profitability. So the three together are kind of what you want to be able to work with to manage culture to get the outcomes that you're looking for. Here's my next question, and it's a correlation between engagement and culture. So, and a lot of people will measure engagement and believe that is equivalent to their culture. So my question is, do you think strong engagement means or is equal to having a healthy culture? Once again on chat, interested in your response to that. If you think that strong engagement means that you've got a healthy culture, is that the way that, is that right? Sandy says not necessarily. John says no, you need more than simple engagement. So there are some fabulous examples where organisations had really strong engagement, but the culture was not particularly healthy. And one that I'll share with you, which, so we all know the Banking Royal Commission, and we know that typically when you go into the archives of the banks, you'll find that they did have and do have quite strong engagement. However, the Royal Commission into banking and finance identified some practices and some behaviours that demonstrated that the culture was not quite right. A really nice example that I've done a bit of research around is the VW diesel emission scandal. So you might recall that, so the history shows and the research shows that Volkswagen had the highest level of trust, the highest level of integrity, the highest level of reliability in comparison to its competitors such as Mercedes, BMW and Audi. And what they found was that, so the engagement was really strong and really high, but there was a underpinning need to win at all costs, which actually allowed them to kind of, I guess, turn a bit of a blind eye or look at some practices that at the end of the day proved to be unethical. And actually, Volkswagen ended up being fined several millions of dollars because they actually tweaked and I guess fudged their results to get through the emissions that were required to get their diesel engines into the field. So the years of pride, the years of trust that had been built in the organisation was all of a sudden eroded, and that organisation spent many, many years looking to rebuild that trust and confidence. So in fact, what we say is that a healthy culture actually equals strong engagement. So it's about flipping it. And if all you're measuring is engagement, and if all you're measuring is and believing that that's giving you an indication of the health of your organisation, just kind of have a think about the fact that you're measuring two very different things. So I just wanted to do a bit of a check-in to make sure that we're all good with that. Does anyone have any questions, or are we good to keep moving? Happy for any kind of feedback at this stage. Okay, how about we keep going? So now that we kind of know that what we want to focus on is culture, then what we want to share with you is our model for how the things that you need to actually think about to be able to transform your culture. And the corporate edge model is very nicely kind of wrapped around 4 key components. And we call it our ACing culture model. So it's really about nailing your culture. And so we start on the left-hand side with the concept of aligning, and this is really about alignment of your leadership team. And what I will do is I've got some slides that follow this that go into the detail of each of these stages. But just, in terms of a general flow of where we start with alignment. We then look at clarity to make sure we've got clarity around the vision, the strategy and the culture that we really want to drive. We then look at communication and how we actually communicate the culture strategy, the culture imperatives, the culture initiatives, the desired behaviours that we're looking for into the business, and then how do we actually go and embed this through our role modelling of our leadership, the connectivity of our people systems, the systems, the symbols, the rituals that we start to drive through the organisation. So this is the overarching model, and now we'll jump into the model and got some questions for you as we go. So the first thing we talk about is align, and this is really about an aligned senior leadership team. The reality is that if you are going to drive culture, and there was an article that I read yesterday that reinforced this, you actually do need the Chief Executive Officer, the Managing Director, your executive team to commit and to engage in the desire to want to build, lead and engage their organisation to the practices that will enable culture. So it's about getting that alignment, and we talk about aligning the executive and getting that direction from the top. So the tone is set from the top, and we've learnt that through some of the findings from from ASIC and from the Royal Commission. Tone is set from the top. So you've also got a board that often sits above your leadership team, and there's that alignment piece that's required there as well. And then you need to make sure that your extended leadership teams are also aligned. So there's that information superiority, there's that bringing people on the journey and actually making sure that people are connected to the direction that you're wanting to take them, and that you agree the path forward so that everybody knows why we're doing this and what we want to achieve from it, the difference it will make, and is committed to the work that has to be done. So led from the top, strong role modelling, commitment to time, resources, and headspace and mindset shift to actually recognise that it's, that you want to shift the organisation from point A to point B. So it's that initial agreement. And so when we look at our culture audit, we actually look at a couple of, we have a culture audit against our ACING model, ACING culture model. And today I'm going to ask you some of the questions from the culture audit just to see if we can get some dialogue happening. And my first question is, so I've told you what I think the executive team role should be. I'm really interested in what your executive team understand their role to be leading culture is. So how would your executive team articulate their role in leading culture? Just interested, and this is once again a free flow in the chat box if you would like to share how your ET step up to the culture challenge. Oh, thanks, John. That's an honest response. Awkwardly. Okay, so Irene, you've given us what I hear constantly is that a lot of people do think it's an HR or a people and culture role. Our belief is that it's very strongly the role of the senior leadership team to lead the culture, but the people and culture team or the HR team have a role in supporting and building the right systems and practices and infrastructure to support it. So Flo, you've got a lovely response here around that they see that they are accountable to set the culture and they're accountable for keeping each other accountable, and accountability is so important, and the ability to actually have that honest conversation and that challenging conversation when we're not delivering on what we've committed and promised to be doing. So some nice variation in responses there from, gosh, it's an awkward conversation and they're still really grappling with it, to they think it's HR, to actually they've got it, they've nailed it, and they're holding each other accountable. That's great. So the next question is actually a polling question, and I'm going to launch the poll, and hopefully you can see that on your screen now. And I'd just like you to be able to, let's see, based on the 20 people we have on our webinar today, you're able, so your poll's not coming up by the looks of it. Let me relaunch it. Okay. All right. So here's the poll. Sorry, we did a little test earlier and we had to relaunch it. Great. You're all into it. You know exactly what I'm looking for. Okay. So it looks like there's a strong response around for something, or sometimes I should say. So we might just give folks another 30 seconds. We've got 11 out of the team, so 61% of folks have voted. But we can wrap it up at that point. 10 seconds if anyone wants to have a go at it before I close it. Okay, we've got a really interesting split between, so a third of you are saying that we actually, so let me share these results with you. So 33% agree that the executive team are pretty well aligned. There's quite a large population though that are saying sometimes, and so sometimes it's interesting in terms of is it sometimes because it depends on what's happening, sometimes because it depends on if it's a good thing to be connected to or aligned to, or a bad thing to be connected or aligned to, or it might just be that some members of the team know more or are connected to it more than others. So so it's great to see that we've got a third, but there's also really nice that we don't have any disagrees. So culture is getting the attention of the top team. It's just a question of how aligned they are on actually understanding their role. So there's a real opportunity for that alignment with that group that are sitting in the sometimes. And kudos to 33% who are saying we've got a really well connected, really aligned executive team. All right, let's keep going. So the second part of our let me see how I get rid of this. I'm not too sure. There we go. Okay, so the second part of our model is around clarifying. And there are two parts to the clarifying. And the clarifying is around clarity, around where you want to proceed or go to in terms of your culture. And there are two parts to this. The first part is the clarity around your culture statement. So what is the culture that you actually want to build and drive within the organisation? And it's about definitively declaring that and stating that. So that's part of Edgar Schein's piece around you need to manage, you need to lead, you need to take control of it. You can't, rather than just letting it happen to you. And that you've tested the culture with senior leaders and that you've actually do some kind of measurement of your current culture. So to clarify, that part A is really about clarity of your statement and then clarity of how you want to see that live and breathe. The second part to this is a culture change plan. So obviously once you've actually got clarity of your, it's kind of like your gap analysis. So where do we want to go? Where are we? What now is our plan? And we're using culture tools, we're not using engagement tools to actually help us think about the plan to go forward. And it's about collaboratively creating a change plan that will positively impact your culture. So we're looking at, and typically some of the levers of your change plan, and every change plan will depend on what the culture is that you're looking for, what the significance of the delta actually is. So it might be that you actually, don't have a lot to change, or you might actually have a significant shift. And so your shift might be that you look at a horizon 1. So what's really achievable in year 1, and then what might you actually look for in year 2, year 3, and what's your ability to stop, measure, reassess as you go. But we do know that you will typically always do work with leaders in developing your leaders to actually role model and coach and build alignment to the culture. We also typically know that reward and recognition programs typically need to be aligned to the desired new culture, because once again, what we reward and what we recognise is what we value. So making sure that that's aligned to the culture that we're looking for. So for example, if you are wanting to build, let's say, a collaborative culture, but yet your KPIs reward individual achievement, then you might actually look at moving and refocusing your key performance indicators to drive that collaborative outcome versus the siloed or the individual kind of outcome. And then you look at some of your other people practices. And in fact, yesterday I was speaking with a client and he said it's not just people practices. He said some of our core business practices, such as our accountability maps, our levels of authority and delegations, say a lot about the trust that we have in terms of how we allow people to engage and act within the organisation. So I remember, and some of you might be familiar with the major change program that David Thodey ran at Telstra. And when he was running a significant customer centricity agenda to move Telstra into this customer centricity space, and he would get a lot of people would often complain that the authorities within the expense reporting system demonstrated a lack of trust for individuals. So he actually that the delegations that were required to sign off on expenses, and he basically said, I trust you every day to come in and work with very expensive equipment, to actually open office doors, close office doors, work with customers. If I can't trust you to put something on your credit card that is in line with company procedure and company ethics, then you're right. The system isn't actually driving your ability to be customer-centric, and I'm not demonstrating trust. So he removed the authorities required for expense management, and it was managed by exception rather than believing a low trust across the business. So there's an example of a system and a very senior leader looking at how that system was actually impacting the culture and demonstrating something that was countercultural to what he was trying to drive. And then the last piece is we talk about exploring the additional levers, and so the additional levers are often things, the symbols that we see around the organisation. So what's up on the walls? Like, do you have pictures up on the wall of your strategy, your values? You know, when you go into a bathroom, what's your experience? What's your experience in the kitchen? Like, everyone's got stuff that goes on in kitchens. There's rituals around that. There are rituals around what happens when you come to work. Like, do you come to work and say hello to people, or do you come to work and sit at your desk and start doing your emails? So there's all those moments that matter that can actually make a big difference to the culture we have and the rituals that we engage in to demonstrate what is important. And then obviously there's a communication strategy that needs to be developed. So your change plan, it's a collaborative effort. It's about working with you and helping guide you through the initiatives and the imperatives that make sense for your business, and that you can actually know that you have the engagement to, the resources, that you can commit to that to actually make a difference. And so it needs to be something that we build together, and that you get some input to, but you own and you drive as you go forward. So a couple of questions here around culture change plans. So let me relaunch a new poll, which, oops, remember I've got to go down here. And so 2 questions here. Our executive team has clearly articulated the desired culture, so that's part 1. And then our leadership team have an agreed commitment on behaviours, symbols, rituals that support our culture. So keen to get your responses and have a go at answering these 2 poll questions, if you could. And I'll just do a quick time check while you're doing that. Okay. Wow, this is a really interesting response in terms of the variety of responses that we're getting. I'm so sorry I can't hear you. I'd love to hear your commentary on how you're rating this and why you're rating it the way you are. So let's give it another 10 seconds for folks who haven't yet been able to. Irene, just going to move my box so I can see. Have values and behaviours, however, not culture. So it'd be interesting whether or not the values and behaviours can be used to, so you've got a statement of values, statement of behaviours, but not a culture statement. Okay. So sometimes organisations will use the value statement as their default for the culture, but once again, it's about being explicit about that and being explicit around how we actually want to be seen and what we want to value. So let me end this poll and I'll share the results with you. So we've got one person who's saying that the exec team has not clearly articulated the desired culture. So once again, I'm you know, without knowing why, there's perhaps the opportunity, and same with the sometimes folks that, you know, it's once again being really clear rather than perhaps leaving it to chance. You know, a good half of the audience is saying yes, we do, and one person saying it's not applicable, that we actually are not working in that way. And then the agreement to the behaviours, once again, it looks like if we were to kind of, you know, add up your 1 and your 2, that we've got the opportunity with almost, you know, more than half of the population who have voted to get some better alignment and agreement around the behaviours that we encourage. So there's another definition of culture, and it's around the behaviours that we encourage and the behaviours that we tolerate. So often the behaviours that we walk past or that we tolerate become the accepted culture. So if we don't actually have agreement, we could, without knowing it, be falling into some custom and practice that we're just kind of tolerating it, and all of a sudden becomes the accepted practice. And then we've got, once again, you know, a good 30, you know, a third of the audience saying, yes, we've got that nailed. So it's, so for us, what we know is that with your culture plan and articulating those behaviours, don't go for a laundry list, because if you go for a really long list and if you make it really complicated and complex, people will not remember them. To actually get stickiness, and so to actually enable people to buy in and connect to the behaviours that you're looking for, I always advise clients to get 1 or 2 key behaviours and really nail those. And once you've got custom and practice and you've got people holding each other to account around those core 1 or 2 behaviours that are really going to help shift the dial, then go to the next 1 or 2 behaviours. So build on it rather than actually going, yep, we're going to get all these things right immediately. So it's what's really important and where can you focus your energy and your resources, because people, there's a lot going on for people, and we want to make this an engaging activity and something that people can actually come back to and see and measure the success and feel like they're achieving something. Okay, so I'm just going to clear this off my page and jump into the next part of our model, which is the communicate. So down to the bottom third of this quadrant, and we're looking at really here. It's great, if you go through the activity of aligning your top team, getting your senior leaders engaged, doing the work to actually really clarify and articulate the target that you're aiming for, the behaviours that you want to support that, and the initiatives or the imperatives that you're going to put in place. It's a really important thing to bring everybody on that, that roadmap with you, and to help people actually connect to it and recognise that they have a role to play. Because whilst I say it's leader-led, the reality is everybody in an organisation has a role to play in culture. And we often talk about a tipping point, and it's a tipping point of 25%. And they say that if you can get 25% of your population engaged and behaving in the new way of work, you'll get that tipping point where everyone will start to follow and start to work in a different way. So communication is absolutely key to bring everybody on board and to bring everyone and align everyone to your new behaviours, your new symbols, your new rituals that you actually want them to work with. And I think we've got some questions here as well around how well we're communicating at the moment. So let me go to the next question. So it would be really interesting to know how well communicated your change plan is. So the first one is about your leaders understanding and committed to the culture change plan, and the second question is that your culture change plan has been launched and communicated. So one is our leaders get it, and then secondly, we've actually cascaded it and started to communicate it to our business. Oh, I love that. Agree scores. They're amazing. Okay, so once again, we've got some really nice congruence at the top around the leaders being committed to the change plan, which I think aligns nicely. Sorry, let me end the poll and let me share the results. I'm ahead of myself. Okay, so hopefully you can see those results. So we can see that congruence with the first question we asked about leaders understanding their role in leading culture. And we can see that, we've got, whilst we don't have fully agree, once again, we've got a couple of people on the fence that kind of, sometimes they're in, sometimes they're out. So the opportunity there, if you think tipping point, is what's the opportunity to get them fully aligned and fully engaged and committed to the change plan. And then secondly, it looks like we're not particularly great at cascading that into the organisation. And once again, it might be countercultural. So the challenge I've got for you to share information or to be transparent. So once again, I challenge you, what is the culture that you're wanting to build? And does that rely on doing things differently to how you've always done it? And so whereas in the past you might typically not have brought people into the conversation, there may be an opportunity to actually swap that out and do something different. So changing culture is about having the courage to do things differently to how you've done them in the past. And part of that could be the way that we communicate and the way that we engage people in the process. So encourage you to have a think about that. So thank you for participating in that poll. It's rich data and fabulous to have you share it with us. Okay, you would have thought I had this sorted by now in terms of which buttons to push and which buttons not to push. But let's have a look at the last part of our model, which is embed. So we've gone align, we've gone clarify, we've gone communicate, and now it's about embedding, and it's about executing your change plan. And it's about, so depending on what's in your change plan, it may be more work with the senior team. And so my experience is that, we want the senior team to lead this. So our role is to help engage, provide expertise, and coach and encourage and enable that executive team to lead this work. And what we need to then do is make sure that our people practices, our business systems are aligned. And I often talk about people practices or systems as leadership by remote control. And what I mean by that is what I do with my, how I run performance conversations, or how I run my reward and recognition program, or how I might run my code of ethics or my accountabilities matrix, says a lot about what I value and where I'm investing my time and effort. When that goes into the business and when my people who I'm leading have these policies and practices that they need to follow, they will guide their behaviour and subconsciously it is telling them what is important and what matters. So great to do all the leadership work, and that's a really important piece, but leaders need to know that the practices and the policies are enabling their leadership and that they're aligned to what we want to achieve in terms of our outcomes. So there's that alignment piece that's really important. So it's that holistic view of how we swap out our culture and how we transform it. We want to build your internal capability. So as I said, you need to be able to be comfortable and confident that this is your organisation and that you are building and leading the culture of your organisation. And finally, make sure that you stop and measure and find your program of work, because as you shift your culture, you might find that you actually want to invest your resources, your energy, your time in a slightly different direction. And I would say, and it's not here, but celebrate. So celebrate your achievements and acknowledge as you are shifting the dial, the shift that you're making. I've had people, CEOs, say to me, so year one, we had this incredible shift and we really shifted the dial significantly. And they then find year 2 and 3 quite difficult because they don't get the same marked shift, but they do get that continued piece because you actually start to have a new normal. And so it's that leveling up each time and saying, let's make sure we're actually getting better at this and we're refining and doing more with our culture work. Because we want to continually get better and make sure that the culture continues to align to the strategy. So it's dynamic and your work needs to be dynamic as you are doing that. The other piece around embed, and the important piece here is, sorry, I've gone the wrong way, that often we get a bit lost in the embed stage. So we get lots of energy and lots of excitement about the aligning the top team, getting clarity and communicating, and then most change efforts fail in the implementation phase. And so those of you who are change experts will know Kotter's research, years and years ago kind of talks about 70% of change efforts failing because of poor implementation. That research has recently been backed up by McKinsey. So McKinsey did a piece of research which is called Beyond Performance 2.0, and they supported Kotter's research around the 70% failure rate at implementation. And I know, working on leadership teams, that we get all excited at the front end and then, we have to keep ourselves accountable. And so think about your scorecard and how you keep yourselves accountable to deliver on the culture that you really want to deliver on. So I've got a last set of polling questions for you. Actually, let's get them up there, but I will launch the poll around embedding. So there are 2 questions here out of our audit survey. So one is, we measure culture. And then secondly, our leaders have the capability to lead culture change. So two really important pieces. We're measuring it and we have the capability. So once again, we've got quite a nice spread, but we've got quite a few folks hanging out in the sometimes space, and I would love to know what's happening in that sometimes space in terms of, once again, you know, do we choose to opt in or opt out, or is it that we think we're measuring culture or we don't do it consistently? Not sure. Yeah. Once again, if anyone would like to add any comments into the comments field, happy to hear what people are thinking around these two items. So I'll close the poll there and I will share with you the results. So what you'll see is that so we're not as strong in measuring culture. So 36% out of, what did we have? We had 11 respondees. So 36%. So 4 folks have gone, yep, we measure it, which is great. But it's been quite consistent throughout this webinar that we've got a small portion, like 30% of our group, that are kind of working and tracking quite nicely. And then once again, the sometimes and the disagree. So those who disagree, are you measuring something else? Or is it like you're using perhaps engagement as your measure of culture? I'm just curious what might be happening there. If anyone wants to jump on chat. Okay. And then the capability to lead culture, once again, we've got 27%, so a third of the, not quite a third, but under a third, saying, yes, we have the capability. And then once again, like nearly 70%, 73% kind of saying sometimes or disagree. So I kind of, that's an interesting one again. Is the sometimes depending on what it is we're doing versus we actually don't have the capability. So that's a really interesting piece around measuring climate versus measuring culture. So be interesting for you to go and have a look at the questions and see, whether they are climate questions or culture questions. And I guess the opportunity there is it giving you the information you need to be able to lead culture change by relying purely on climate? Because climate is really about how I'm feeling at a particular moment versus how we do things around here, which is much more deeply entrenched beliefs, mindsets of what's important in the organisation. Let's move on, and I think we get to kind of the next part of the webinar, which is the role your role in leading culture, and this is really aimed at people who are leading culture. And so when we do a lot of our leadership work, we work with leadership teams, and we really get them to be accountable for how they lead culture. And so let me share with you our view on what the leader's role is in leading culture. And so there are 3 components to this. One is it's really your accountability as a leader in leading culture to communicate the expectation. And what we say about the expectation is, what is it we expect people to be doing in terms of their focus on culture, have a culture that we're building actually links to strategy, have a culture helps drive the company forward, what the values and what the behaviours are that we're asking people to actually demonstrate, and what success looks like if people exhibit these behaviours. So it's almost like when you're working with, if you think about the language of expectation, it's a very deliberate word, because we want you to be really clear about what you expect. Because if you don't articulate what you expect, it's really hard then to actually to be able to role model and hold people accountable. So the second role in leading culture is to actually role model the expectation. So you kind of can't just say it and not do it. If you express an expectation a particular way, then you need to be able to deliver on that and role model that expectation. And you need to kind of go and get some feedback. You need to be a little bit vulnerable, and you need to be open to perhaps being told sometimes that you don't always role model what we say we do. So fact is, we're human. We drop into the unconscious quite regularly, and we drop into some bad behaviours. So it's important that we ask people for feedback, and we go and we seek feedback, but we also are consistent. So one of the key traits of really effective leaders, and if you think about leaders that you've worked with and that you've enjoyed working with, is A, the say-do, that there's actually an equal ratio of what I say and what I do is a really important piece. And then secondly, that their language is consistent with the culture of the organisation, their behaviour is consistent, and there's that word consistent. So it's actually something that you can rely on and know that that is how someone is going to show up on a day-to-day basis. And that requires thoughtfulness and mindfulness to be able to do that work. And then lastly, we say that your role is to actually hold others accountable for the expectation. And so once again, we actually have to give each other feedback, and we need to give each other feedback in the moment, and we need to give feedback consistently. So if we're not giving each other feedback, then we are tolerating the behaviours, and we're allowing practices and behaviours to continue that don't always necessarily align to the culture that we're wanting. We also talk about consequences. So we also say that people need to actually know and build into the KPIs and the accountability frameworks what's expected and holding people to account. So when you think about the changes that have occurred with senior executive remuneration post the Royal Commission and some of the findings, so a lot of executive KPIs now and bonuses are based on the culture, and they're setting the tone from the top and actually delivering on culture and the financial performance of business. So there's this ampersand, so it's the and, it's not the or, and it's about making sure that we actually are building that accountability so that we are holding true to the culture that we want. And then, as I say, make sure we recognise and celebrate success. So when we hold others accountable, let's celebrate the achievements that we've had as we're actually leading and driving our culture. So culture change, unfortunately, there's not one button you can press. And I often talk about it like an artist's palette. And actually, I will often say that you've got this myriad of colour, like if you think about like an artist's palette, lots of different colours. And you've got to, and you need to know at which time what colour swab you're picking, and if it's a thick stroke or a thin stroke, or it's how am I mixing, the blue with the red with the green to kind of get the culture that I'm looking for. How am I building my leadership capability? How are we holding people to account with us? So there's a couple of things that I've learned over time that I wanted to share with you as we get towards the end of this webinar around what truly makes a difference in being able to transform an organisational culture. I do believe that it needs to be leader-led and role modelled. I have worked with organisations where we've actually, as a consulting organisation, working into an organisation who have wanted to change culture and have delegated it to OD or HR, and the CEO stepped back. It hasn't worked. It's been quite disastrous. And so one of my key lessons is that if the CEO or the managing director is not engaging in the conversation, then I think you'll find it tough to actually get the stickiness and the traction to create the shift that you're needing to make. Communication, I think that you have to communicate constantly and relentlessly. So it's that old adage, tell them once, tell them twice, tell them 3 times, tell them 4 times, maybe tell them 6 times. And when you get frustrated and you think, but I've told them, go back and tell them again. Also think about what we call the communication rolling stone, and that is that often leaders will decide something months in advance of when they actually communicate it. And so as a leadership team, we've been through the whole change cycle, and we've been through the debate, the dialogue, the discussion, the decision, and we're now ready to implement. And when we get to implementation, often it's several weeks or months later from when we first had the dialogue. And all of a sudden, we're now communicating it to the business, but it's new for the business, and they haven't had the same opportunity that the leadership team had back here to engage, debate, discuss, dialogue. And so we're having to roll the stone and acknowledge that people need to catch up and have time to process and engage from a change point of view. So there's some change strategies and change practices that are really important. And as I said earlier, focus on mastering. I've got 2 to 3 new behaviours here. Phil Allison, who's our CEO and founder, he says, let's maybe just get one right, and let's make sure that we've got that one before we start to move on to trying to get others and a whole shopping list of behaviours. So there's some of my key learnings of working with organisations over many years. I must admit I had a couple more that I wanted to add, but I think they're some of my key learnings. I don't have a chat box or a question for this, but does anyone else have anything that some of their key learnings that they want to share with the group before we start to wrap up? So something you've learnt that makes a real difference in how you can transform culture. You must have some gems. No one want to share? Irene starts at the top. So good alignment there. You agree with me, which is fabulous. Thank you. I'm pleased that I got a lol out of you. Let the organisation be involved in deciding what culture is to increase accountability of everyone, not just execs. Yeah, and I think that if you start by the challenge I have, Flo, with that is that if the exec don't agree, then how do you actually, if you go out for feedback and the exec don't agree with the feedback, you then need to find a way to articulate why you disagree or why you're moving in a different direction to what you're getting from the field. So that's where I've worked with organisations where they will go and they will seek feedback, and they've struggled because they actually disagree with the feedback, and they've had to find a way to actually move forward without acknowledging or without taking on board that feedback. So just think about, if you're going to embrace, how you do that. Yeah, and I think it's about how you socialise, how you bring people on board, and how you actually get people to engage in. So I often think that if you set the strategy in terms of your culture direction and then get people to contribute to how the behaviours look in real life. So how does that then look for us in real life, which is where you can start to get that engagement. And we agree that you actually, once you've got the executive team who have set the parameters, we like to work with a team of folks in the business to put to kind of flesh it out as to how it looks and feels. So I think there's an opportunity to meet in the middle there. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. So we've got 5 minutes. My last slide is an opportunity for you to engage in our culture audit. Just before I do that, so Sumed's talked about changing the HR team has moved our culture a bit. Okay, so changing some of your profile of your team has actually shifted, and that often will happen is that if you get new people joining the organisation, it's how quickly they either adopt to the entrenched ways of working, or whether they start to bring new ways of working into the workplace, which is fabulous. Okay. Just let me check before I go to my last slide. Does anyone have a question that they might like to ask, or a comment they might like to make before we wrap up and close? Okay, so we during the course of this webinar, I think I threw probably 10 polling questions at you. And what we have developed is a short questionnaire which gives you 20 odd questions against the ACE culture model that we would invite you to complete. And we would be more than happy to, once you have the opportunity to complete that, to provide you with a free 30-minute consultation to work through what your results are saying and you know, whether or not you are looking to change up the way that you're managing your culture at the moment, or actually you've got it nailed and you're covering all those aspects. So just an opportunity for you to do a little self-audit and get some feedback if you're interested in it. So we will send that link out to you, and happy to participate and engage in that dialogue and give you back some value, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. So it's kind of a gift to you to get some feedback on your current practice. So that's kind of it for me in terms of what we've covered. So if we think about what we set out to achieve, we really wanted to articulate why culture is important, and it really is. In the last couple of years, it's become a really important imperative at the board level and CEO level, and it is typically on the agenda of many organisations. A lot of organisations sometimes aren't too sure where to start, and that's okay. We do know that if you know, I guess our model has been proven, and it's one that we have worked with many clients on, and we continue to refine it, and we continue to adapt based on the capability of the organisation we're working with, the resources that they have, the time that they're working to, and kind of what support they're looking for as they go. And then finally, being really clear about the leader's role, and really clear about what value you add if you're working in a people and culture role or in a line management support role, to actually engage and help build that capability of the organisation. Measurement's important, celebration's important, and kind of it's fun. Culture's fun. It can be sticky, it can be icky, it can be messy, but it kind of needs to be a little bit like that to be able to come out the end and have clarity of what you're trying to achieve. So thank you for your participation today. I really, you know, do look forward to, if you would like to complete that survey or any feedback that you have, welcome to take it. So I think we're good for time, and I'd just like to say thanks. Thanks for your participation, and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks, everybody. I'll be closing the webinar now.